The house felt heavier than ever as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers into the holloway's fractured sanctuary. Evelyn stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the orchard's edge where the faint, eerie glow of the midnight fruit pulsed softly in the gathering darkness. Her heart pounded in her chest, a relentless drumbeat of fear and determination. The curse, she knew, had not fully lifted. Its echoes hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Inside the parlor, Margaret settled herself on the worn armchair, clutching a small cluster of the glowing fruit she had carefully gathered over the past days. Her pale fingers trembled as she brought the fruit close, whispering words that no one else could hear. Her wide eyes glazed, distant and haunted, as visions danced behind her lid's fragments of ritual fires, shadowed figures, and the endless hungry darkness that had long plagued their bloodline. "Margaret," Evelyn called softly, stepping inside, her voice tentative but firm. "You shouldn't be alone with those things." Margaret's lips parted in a faint smile, fragile like a whisper on the wind. "They speak to me," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "The orchard isn't done. It's still hungry." Evelyn swallowed hard, the weight of those words settling like stones in her stomach. The hunger wasn't just physical, it was a gnawing void that clawed at their souls, a relentless force that had bound them since time immemorial. Across the room, the front door creaked open and Lucas stepped inside, his dark hair tousled, face drawn and pale from restless nights. His restless eyes met Evelyn's, a mixture of remorse and resolve burning within them. "I'm going back tonight," he said abruptly. "I have to understand it. I need to know if this hunger can be fought, or if we're just delaying the inevitable." "Lucas," Evelyn's voice cracked with both warning and pleading, "you don't have to do this alone. We'll face it together." But Lucas shook his head, the stubborn set of his jaw betraying his impulsive nature. "No. I caused enough damage already. If anyone has to pay, it should be me." Evelyn's mind raced, memories of his reckless midnight excursions flashing before her eyes, the near-fatal encounter with the glowing fruit, the way his actions had nearly torn their family apart. Yet beneath that fear was a fierce pride in his courage and willingness to bear the burden. Margaret rose unsteadily, her pale face etched with worry. "Please be careful," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The orchard sees more than you think. It listens." The night deepened, wrapping the Holloways in its cold embrace as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Evelyn checked the knife she always kept beneath her pillow, her fingers brushing the cold steel with a desperate steadiness. She knew that the hunger clawing at their insides was not just a physical craving, but a manifestation of the orchard's ancient cursor legacy that demanded sacrifice and submission. As the clock struck midnight, Lucas stepped into the orchard's shadowed realm, the twisted branches seeming to reach out like spectral hands, their glowing fruit casting an otherworldly light. The air was thick with a metallic scent, sharp and oppressive, and the silence was broken only by the faint rustling of leaves, whispering secrets older than memory. Lucas moved cautiously, his breath visible in the chill night air, every nerve alert. He knelt beside a cluster of fruit, feeling the unnerving vibrancy beneath his fingertips. The orchard pulsed with a life of its own, a sentient hunger that seemed to bore into his very soul. He closed his eyes, willing himself to confront the darkness without succumbing. Back inside, Evelyn and Margaret waited in tense silence, their hearts bound to Lucas's fate. Margaret's visions continued to flicker shadowy images of past sacrifices, the faces of ancestors lost to the curse, and a faint glimmer of hope buried beneath the despair. Suddenly, a sharp cry pierced the night. Evelyn's blood ran cold as she rushed outside, finding Lucas on his knees, eyes wild and unseeing, clutching a glowing fruit that pulsed like a heartbeat. He looked at her, a flicker of clarity returning. "It's not over," he gasped. "The hunger, it's a part of us now." Evelyn helped him to his feet, her mind swirling with dread and determination. They had faced the orchard's wrath together, yet the curse's grip remained unbroken, its echoes of hunger reverberating through their bodies and souls. In the days that followed, the Holloways grappled with the uneasy truth. Freedom might demand sacrifices they were not yet ready to make, and the orchard's hunger was a shadow that would linger, haunting their every step. Yet amidst the fear and uncertainty, a fragile resolve took root. They would fight not just to survive, but to reclaim the legacy stolen by blood and darkness. The orchard's glow remained a warning and a beacon, a reminder that the battle for their souls was far from over. And as the night stretched on, the siblings gathered once more, their voices low but resolute, bound by the unbreakable threads of family and fate. The echoes of hunger whispered around them, but so did the faint promise of redemption. "We endure," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands, "because we have to. We are the Holloways, and this curse will not define us." The orchard pulsed softly in the distance, its glowing fruit a haunting reminder of the past, present, and uncertain future. But beneath the sorrow and dread, a spark of hope flickered, a fragile light in the darkness, waiting to be nurtured into dawn. Harriet Bell's study was a cramped shrine to forgotten histories. The walls, lined with faded photographs and brittle newspaper clippings, seemed to close in as Evelyn, Lucas, and Margaret stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old paper, a tangible reminder of secrets long buried. Harriet, her short, wiry frame hunched over a cluttered desk, looked up with piercing eyes that glittered with a strange urgency. "There's more to this curse than you know," she said, flipping through a leather-bound ledger. "The records here. They show sacrifices, disappearances, and whispers of a dark pact tied not just to your family, but to the entire town." Evelyn leaned in, eyes scanning the faded ink. "How far back do these go?" she asked, voice tight. "Centuries," Harriet replied. "Long before the Holloways inherited the orchard." Lucas ran a hand through his scruffy hair, disbelief flickering across his restless eyes. "So, it's not just us." Harriet's gaze hardened. "No, the orchard's curse is a shadow cast over this place, feeding on generations of blood and silence." Margaret clutched her notebook tightly, her pale face paling further as fragmented images danced behind her eyes. Visions of hooded figures and glowing fruit, of dark rituals beneath a blood-red moon. Later that evening, the siblings met Reverend Caleb Marks in the dim sanctuary of the town's old church. The aged man's gaunt face was shadowed beneath the flickering candlelight as he spoke with a grave solemnity. "The darkness you face," he began, voice rasping, "is older than any of us. Your bloodline is bound not only to the orchard, but to something far deeper. A darkness that has lain in wait, growing stronger with each generation." Evelyn's jaw tightened. "Is there a way out?" The Reverend's eyes flickered with a mix of sorrow and warning. "To break the curse is to challenge forces beyond mortal reckoning. Freedom may come at a price higher than you can bear." Outside, the orchard loomed under a waning moon, its twisted branches casting long, sinister shadows. The siblings stood together, the night air heavy with doubt and fear. The weight of their family's legacy pressed down like the suffocating silence between whispered confessions. Margaret, voice barely above a whisper, shared her visions, memories not her own, of sacrifices forgotten and bargains struck in blood. Her words stirred a cold wind that rustled the glowing fruit, as if the orchard itself listened and waited. Evelyn exchanged a glance with Lucas, whose impulsiveness had led them this far but now seemed a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. They were caught between the desire to fight and the creeping realization that the past might never truly let them go. As the night deepened, so did their resolve, tempered by the chilling knowledge that their battle was no longer just for survival, but for the very soul of their family and perhaps the town itself. The shadows of the past stretched long and dark, and the question remained, could they sever the roots of this ancient curse, or were they destined to become its next chapter? The orchard's eerie glow pulsed faintly in the distance, a silent reminder that some darknesses never fully fade. They only wait, patient and hungry, for the next soul to feed. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the Holloways knew their fight was far from over. The weight of legacy, Evelyn Holloway sat rigidly in the parlor of the family estate, the old house creaking faintly around her as the fire sputtered low in the hearth. Shadows danced across the peeling wallpaper and the worn edges of the furniture. But it was the darkness in her mind that seemed the most suffocating. A distant owl hooted, its mournful call a reminder of the night's relentless passage. She clenched her hands tightly in her lap, knuckles whitening, eyes fixed on the flickering flames, but seeing only the weight that had settled on her soul. For weeks, the orchard had been an unrelenting presence, not just in the land outside, glowing with its eerie midnight fruit, but inside their lives, their very blood. The curse was no longer an abstract horror whispered about in the town's shadows or locked away in faded journals. It was real, tangible, and it demanded sacrifices. Every night, Evelyn felt the hunger gnawing at her, a hollow ache that was both physical and spiritual. The responsibility to protect her siblings, to break the cycle, clawed at her from within. Her mind drifted to the family, to Lucas and Margaret, both caught in their own storms. Lucas, with his reckless bravery, always pushing boundaries, hungry for answers and desperate to prove himself beyond the curse's shadow. Margaret, fragile yet fierce in her own quiet way, burdened with visions that none of them fully understood but all feared. They needed a path forward, but Evelyn wasn't sure if such a path existed. A soft knock disturbed the silence. Evelyn's heart leaped, but it was only Margaret entering quietly, her pale face etched with worry. She moved to sit beside Evelyn, clutching a small, glowing fruit, one of the orchard's midnight harvests. The soft light illuminated her wide eyes, shimmering with unspoken fears. "Evelyn," Margaret whispered, voice trembling, "I saw it again. The orchard. It's not just our curse. It's tied to the town, to everyone. If we tried to break free, it could tear more than just us apart." Evelyn swallowed hard, the crushing truth settling deeper. The weight of legacy was heavier than she'd imagined. "I know," she said quietly, "but if we don't try, we'll be consumed anyway." Later that evening, the siblings gathered beneath the skeletal branches of the orchard. The glowing fruit hung like spectral lanterns, casting an eerie, unnatural light on their strained faces. Lucas paced restlessly, the tension in his lean frame palpable. "We can't just wait for this thing to devour us," he said, voice sharp. "We have to fight. And if fighting means losing ourselves." Evelyn countered, her gaze steady yet laced with exhaustion. "What then?" Margaret shivered, clutching the fruit tighter. "I don't know if there's a way out that doesn't hurt us all." Their debate was interrupted by the sudden arrival of Harriet Bell, the local historian whose sharp wit and sharper tongue were known throughout the town. She approached with her usual briskness, notebook in hand, eyes gleaming with a mix of warning and urgency. "You're all dancing on the edge of something far darker than you realize," Harriet said, voice low but insistent. "This orchard isn't just a family curse, it's woven into the very fabric of the town's history. Your ancestors weren't the only ones who made deals. The consequences ripple beyond what you see." Evelyn felt a chill settle over her. Harriet's revelations added layers to their already complicated dilemma. The curse was a living thing, fed by secrets and sacrifices, and the town itself was complicit in its existence. As twilight deepened, Reverend Caleb Marks came to stand with them near the orchard's twisted heart. His gaunt face was grave, eyes shadowed with years of guilt and knowledge. "Breaking the pact," he said slowly, "is no simple matter. There's a cost, not just to you, but to all tied to this legacy. The hunger will not be sated easily, and the darkness you awaken may consume more than you bargained for." Evelyn met his gaze, the enormity of his warning pressing down like a physical weight. "Then what choice do we have? To surrender and lose ourselves, or fight and risk everything?" The wind whispered through the branches, carrying with it the voices of generations past, sacrifices made, bargains struck, and lives lost to an insatiable hunger. In that moment, Evelyn realized the true meaning of legacy. It was not just a burden to bear, but a chain that bound them to a fate they must either embrace or break. Her voice was steady as she spoke to her siblings, the fire in her eyes igniting a resolve tempered by fear. "We decide, together, we can't run from this anymore. But whatever path we choose, we face it as a family." Lucas nodded, the restless energy in his body settling into a fierce determination. Margaret's eyes shone with a quiet hope, fragile yet real. They stood united beneath the orchard's spectral glow, the weight of their legacy no longer just a chain, but a call to action. Outside, the town lay silent but watchful, its own fears and secrets entwined with their fate. The Holloways were no longer just heirs to a cursed land, they were the last hope to break its cycle. As the first stars flickered in the night sky, Evelyn felt the cold bite of uncertainty mixed with a fierce spark of defiance. The orchard waited, patient and hungry, but so were they, and the true reckoning was yet to come. The orchard loomed above them like a living nightmare, its branches twisting and writhing under the cold light of the midnight moon. Each tree bore fruit that pulsed with an unholy glow, casting an eerie luminescence that peeled back the darkness like a veil. Evelyn stood at the forefront, her heart pounding fiercely, a mixture of fear and fierce determination coursing through her veins. The air was thick with the scent of decay and sweetness, an intoxicating perfume that seemed to seep into their very souls. Lucas shuffled nervously beside her, his restless eyes darting between the glowing fruit and the shadows that danced with unnatural life. Margaret clung close, pale and trembling, her wide eyes reflecting the orchard's eerie light as she whispered soft incantations she barely understood but knew were their only hope. "This is it," Evelyn murmured, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We face it now, or we lose everything." Reverend Caleb Marks stood a few steps behind, his gaunt frame cloaked in dark robes that seemed to absorb the orchard's glow. The weight of his guilt pressed down on him, but tonight he was no longer an observer. Harriet Bell, notebook clutched tightly, watched with piercing eyes, her sharp voice barely a whisper. "The pact's roots run deeper than we feared. This isn't just our fight anymore." Suddenly, Lucas stepped forward, drawn irresistibly toward a cluster of fruit glowing brighter than the rest. "Wait," Evelyn hissed, reaching out to stop him, but it was too late. His fingers brushed the fruit's surface, and the orchard reacted violently. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a suffocating wave of hunger and despair washed over them. Branches lashed out like serpents, and the glowing fruit pulsed with an angry rhythm. "Lucas," Evelyn cried, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. The orchard's presence pressed against them, an overwhelming force that threatened to drown them in its insatiable hunger. Margaret's voice rose in a haunting chant, the words ancient and fragile, weaving a shield that shimmered faintly between them and the orchard's malevolence. The swirling vortex of light and shadow coalesced before their eyes, a tangible manifestation of the curse that had haunted their family for generations. Evelyn's mind raced, recalling the ritual they had uncovered in the dusty journals, words of binding and release, sacrifice and salvation. She took a deep breath, steadied by the unwavering gaze of her siblings. "Together," she said firmly, "we end this." The orchard responded with a shriek that seemed to echo through the very fabric of night, a sound that was part wind, part wail, part something altogether otherworldly. Branches bent toward them like claws, but the siblings stood firm, their joined hands a testament to their resolve. Reverend Marks began to chant alongside Margaret, his voice heavy with remorse but unwavering. Harriet recited the history of the pact, her words cutting through the chaos, reminding them of what had been lost and what could still be saved. Evelyn stepped forward, holding the ancient documents aloft. "We break the curse tonight," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "No more hiding, no more fear." The orchard convulsed violently, fruit glowing brighter, then dimmer, shadows twisting and recoiling as if wounded but defiant. A final surge of energy burst forth, and then silence. The oppressive presence lifted, leaving the siblings gasping, clutching each other in the stillness that followed. But the victory was bittersweet. Bonds had been tested and strained. Scars both visible and hidden marked their souls. Evelyn's eyes met those of her siblings, Lucas's restless gaze, now tempered with respect, Margaret's fragile hope shining through the fear. The orchard's glow was fading, but the night still held its secrets. Evelyn knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain. They had crossed a threshold, but the cost of freedom was only just beginning to reveal itself. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the Holloways stood together, scarred, weary, but unbroken. The orchard's shadow lingered, a silent reminder of the legacy they had inherited and the future they had chosen to fight for. "Whatever comes next," Evelyn whispered, "we face it as one." And with that, the family stepped away from the orchard's edge, into the uncertain light of a new day, their fate forever entwined with the land they called home. The earliest light of dawn crept across the horizon, pale and tentative, as if uncertain whether to disturb the night's lingering shadows. Evelyn Holloway stood at the edge of the orchard, her breath visible in the cool morning air, watching as the eerie luminescence that had bathed the fruit throughout the night began to wane. The glowing midnight fruit dimmed slowly, their unnatural radiance fading into muted shades of green and brown. It was the first sign that the orchard's power, so relentless and suffocating for generations, was shifting. Relief flickered deep within Evelyn's chest, but it was tangled with a gnawing unease that refused to be silenced. Behind her, the family home was quiet, save for the soft rustling of curtains stirred by a gentle breeze. Inside, Lucas Holloway sat slumped on an old wooden chair, his body still aching from the recent trials. Bruises mottled his arms and face, reminders of the orchard's wrath and his own reckless defiance. His restless eyes darted around the dimly lit room, catching the flicker of candlelight that danced across the peeling wallpaper. A mixture of exhaustion and stubborn determination settled over him, a silent vow to protect what remained of his family, no matter the cost. Margaret, small and pale, wandered the orchard's perimeter, her bare feet brushing the dew-kissed grass. Her fingers trembled as she reached out to touch the last glowing fruit, now faint and flickering like a dying ember. She whispered to them in a voice barely audible, a soft murmur that seemed to draw on the fragile connection she still held with the orchard's fading power. Visions haunted her eyeshadows of past sacrifices, echoes of pain mingled with fleeting hope. She was the emotional barometer of their unraveling, and in this moment, her sorrow felt as palpable as the cool mist wrapping around her. Outside, Reverend Caleb Marks and Harriet Bell stood on the porch of the Holloway house, their faces creased with worry and weariness. Their conversation was low and urgent, voices barely above the whispering wind. Behind them, the orchard cast long, twisted shadows in the morning light, a silent reminder of the darkness that still lurked beneath the surface. Both knew that while the orchard's glow had dimmed, the curse's grip was not easily undone. The town's fragile peace was a veneer, thin and brittle, held together by secrets and sacrifices too painful to speak aloud. Inside, Evelyn turned from the orchard and faced her siblings. "It's different," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside. "The orchard's light is fading. That means something, but it doesn't mean it's over. Not yet." Lucas nodded, rubbing his bruised arm. "I'm still not sure if we're free or if it's just catching its breath." Margaret's eyes, wide and shimmering with unshed tears, met Evelyn's. "I see it in my dreams. The orchard isn't done with us." Evelyn clenched her fists, the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders like a stone. "Then we keep fighting. We rebuild what we can, and we watch." Days passed, the orchard's once vibrant glow now a pale memory. The land seemed quieter, almost peaceful, but an undercurrent of tension threaded through the Holloway household. Conversations grew cautious, trust fragile. The siblings grappled with the aftermath the sacrifices made, the losses endured, and the uncertain future stretching before them. Harriet Bell's cryptic clues about the town's history sowed seeds of doubt. "The curse may be older than even the Holloways realize," she told Evelyn one afternoon, her voice sharp with urgency, "and breaking it might come with a price none of us are ready to pay." Reverend Marks echoed the warning during a tense meeting. "The orchard's hunger is ancient. It feeds not just on blood, but on fear and guilt. Even if its glow fades, its shadow remains." Evelyn wrestled with these truths in the quiet moments, her dreams haunted by the orchard's fading light and the faces of those lost. Yet, amidst the lingering dread, a spark of hope persisted. The family was still together, still fighting. The dimming light was not an end, but a beginning, a chance to reclaim their lives, to forge a new legacy. But as the sun set each evening, casting long shadows over the orchard's twisted branches, Evelyn could not shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. The orchard's presence lingered like a ghost, watching, waiting, and in the deepest silence of the night, beneath the hollowed sky, the faintest pulse of light would sometimes flicker too faint to see, yet impossible to ignore. The harvest was not yet complete. Evelyn's gaze hardened as she prepared for whatever came next. The dimming light was a fragile victory, but the true cost of freedom was still hidden in the shadows. "We'll face it together," she whispered to the night. "Whatever it takes." The orchard stood silent, its curse dormant but not destroyed, a haunting legacy that would forever bind the Holloways to its dark heart. And as the family began to rebuild amidst uncertainty and lingering dread, One question remained: had they truly escaped, or were they simply waiting for the darkness to return? The answers lay beyond the fading glow, in the shadows of the past and the uncertain promise of the future. The night was far from over. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the horizon, casting long, pale shadows across the Holloway orchard. The eerie glow that had once bathed the twisted branches and the luminescent fruit was gone, replaced by a dullness that seemed unnatural in its own right. Evelyn stood silently at the edge of the orchard, her eyes fixed on the darkened fruit hanging from gnarled limbs that twisted like the shadows of a nightmare. The air was thick with a silence so complete it pressed against her chest, stealing her breath. Behind her, Lucas and Margaret emerged from the house, their faces drawn and pale. The night's ritual had exacted a toll on them all, a toll measured not just in exhaustion, but in the fragments of their souls left scattered among the glowing embers of the orchard's power. Evelyn's gaze softened as she watched her siblings approach, the weight of their shared ordeal binding them in a fragile solidarity. "It's quiet," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. She cradled a single fruit in her hands, one that still pulsed faintly with a ghost of its former light. The sight was a bittersweet reminder of what they had fought to contain, and what still lingered, waiting. Evelyn nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Too quiet," she replied. "But it's not gone, not yet." Inside the house, the remnants of their desperate battle lay strewn across the floor: scorched papers, broken candles, and the remnants of herbs and talismans once meant to bind and repel. Evelyn sank into a chair, her fingers trembling as she unfolded a crumpled page from the ritual book. The words were etched deeply into her memory now. The incantations, the sacrifices, the warnings. Lucas paced restlessly nearby, barely able to contain the surge of adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "Did it work?" he asked, voice rough with uncertainty. "For now," Evelyn answered, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning within. "But the orchard is patient. It's waiting for the right moment to wake again." Margaret sat near the window, the last glowing fruit resting gently in her palm. Her eyes were distant, reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "It's hungry," she murmured. "But maybe, if we listen, we can learn its hunger, understand it better." Evelyn glanced at her youngest sibling, a flicker of hope piercing her exhaustion. "Maybe, but it's a dangerous path." Outside the town limits, Reverend Caleb Marks and Harriet Bell stood beneath the pallid sky, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. The weight of the Holloway's actions pressed heavily upon them both. "They've bought themselves time," Reverend Marks said quietly, his eyes dark with decades of regret. "But the orchard's curse is ancient. It doesn't die easily." Harriet folded her arms, her gaze hard and unwavering. "And neither do the debts owed to it. The town will remember. The curse will find new ways to feed." Reverend Marks sighed, a sound filled with resignation. "The price of survival is never free." Back at the orchard, the Holloway siblings stood united for a moment longer, the first rays of sunlight washing over them like a fragile benediction. The land beneath their feet seemed to breathe quietly, as if in slumber. Yet Evelyn knew the truth. Beneath the dormancy, the orchard's ancient hunger stirred still, waiting for the night to come again. With a final look at the silent trees, Evelyn whispered, "We survived. But at what cost?" The orchard remained, a dark sentinel in the waking world, and the Holloway family, bound by blood and burdened by legacy, faced an uncertain future, one where freedom was tentative, and the price of survival would echo through generations yet to come. As the sun climbed higher, casting light on the fractured land, the question lingered in the air like a shadow. Could they ever truly escape the harvest of souls? The morning was quiet, but beneath the calm surface, the Holloways felt the tremors of a destiny still unfolding. Evelyn's hands clenched the edge of the porch rail, knuckles white against the dawn chill. The orchard behind her was still, but the silence was no comfort. It was a warning. "We've done what we can," Lucas said softly, joining her. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the turmoil inside. "Now it's time to live with the consequences." Margaret appeared at the doorway, her pale face framed by strands of light hair. "It's not over," she said quietly. "I can feel it." Evelyn turned to her younger sibling, searching those wide eyes for hope. "Then we keep watching. We keep fighting." The orchard waited. The family waited. And the curse, ancient, hungry, and patient, waited too. The end was never really an end. It was only another beginning.